Hello and welcome to the first lecture of Developing Crisis Communication Plan in this course, Crisis Management. So in this particular section, we will talk about how to go about developing crisis communication plan. And the first part of that is to define key messaging principles. And these principles are like honesty, transparency, and accountability. So first, let's see that developing a crisis communication plan is a part of a bigger topic of mastering crisis communication. The other two being leveraging multi-channel communication and monitoring and responding in time. Now, in developing a crisis communication, that's what we will talk about in this section. The first lecture that we are talking about is defining key messages, messaging principles like honesty, transparency, and accountability. So, how to define? How would you define? What is the definition of key messaging? These key messaging principles, being honesty, transparency, and accountability. And why should we do that? So first, let's understand that establishing clear messaging principles can ensure that the communication that you have in the crisis situation is consistent, credible, and aligned with the company values. And these principles, the principles that we talked about of honesty, transparency, and accountability, can help build trust with your key stakeholders, media, customers, and regulators. And that's what you need in a crisis, don't you? Right. So let's take a look at how to define these and what are the definitions of these key messaging principles of honesty, transparency, and accountability. So first, we need to, establish core messaging guidelines. So before crafting the message, we need to make sure that we follow in all communication these three guiding principles. And what are these three guiding principles? We talked about them. Let's recap here. First is honesty. Second is transparency. And third is accountability. So before you craft your messages, make sure that all your communication follow these three guiding principles. Now let's take a look at what do they really mean in honesty, transparency, and accountability. Let's take a look at that. So honesty basically means, I would say, it's a three, legged stool. It stands on three things. First is the fact-based communication, and that requires you to share accurate, verifiable information. The information that you are sharing should be verified. Well, it should be accurate. People, when they verify, they say, yeah, I think they told us the right thing. Second, if there is an uncertainty, you need to acknowledge uncertainty. If the details are unclear, you should state what you know and what is being investigated. So you need to acknowledge uncertainty. Third is to avoid exaggeration and misleading statements. And there you need to be realistic about commitments, challenges, and outcomes. So that's the three legs of this honesty stool. Now let's take a look at an example. Now, instead of saying we guarantee this issue will never happen again, which sounds exaggeration, right? How can you guarantee that issue will never happen again? So it's a misleading and exaggerated statement. We should be saying we are taking all necessary steps to prevent this issue in future because that's what is within your control, right? You can take necessary steps, but whether this will get prevented in future, only time can tell. So that's an example of an honest communication. The second part of the communication principle is the transparency, as we saw. And what does that mean? Here again, let's define it on the basis of the three legs of the stool of transparency. So first thing is to provide clear and open information. So there, what you need to do is to share policies, decisions, and actions that you are taking or going to take openly. Openly meaning you should be able to talk to, let's say, a crowd of 250 people without blinking an eyelid, honestly, genuinely. So that's how you need to provide a clear and open information. Second thing is to disclose mistakes promptly. If you make mistakes, you need to take responsibility instead of waiting for the external exposure. So own up mistakes as early as possible, immediately, promptly. Third is to maintain open communication channels. and that requires you to help your stakeholders to ask questions, and then you provide feedback. So you must be able to generate that confidence and opportunity for your stakeholders to ask questions. Let's take a look at an example. If you are facing a data breach, what should your company state? You should state that we identified a security issue affecting customer data as on this date and are working with the cybersecurity experts to resolve it. And here is how we are protecting your information moving forward. And then you should provide the details of what you are doing to protect the employees or stakeholders' information from going to third parties. So that's what a transparency means. The third element is accountability, and that again on three principles, three dimensions, means owning up to actions and decisions. You accept responsibility when mistakes happen, particularly when mistakes happen. Then you outline corrective measures, where you explain how issues will be addressed and prevented in future. And the last part of accountability is to follow through on commitments. There you need to ensure that the actions align with the strategies. You are doing actually what your messages have you have communicated in your messages. In an example that we will take you through now, if it could be an example, a right example is a CEO responding to crisis should say, we take full responsibility for this incident. That's being accountable, owning up the actions and decisions. And here is what we're going to do to correct it. So you outline the correct measures, and instead of shifting the blame, and then you should follow through. So this is a good example of exhibiting a accountable message. So after having defined these principles, as we have done, let's take a look at the second step, which is to implement message across different platforms. So different stakeholders require tailored messages, while keeping the core principle intact. And there are two kinds of communication. One, as you're seeing, is the internal communication to employees and leadership, and what are the different platforms, the ways you can implement the message, send the message. You can do through regular town halls, emails, and policy updates. You can encourage open dialogues and feedback loops and train leadership to communicate honestly and clearly. So that's how you can do this messaging internally. For external communication to customers, media, regulators, and public, you can issue press releases and public statements with a clear, consistent tone. You can use social media and official channels to provide updates, and you need to respond promptly to inquiries and concerns. Remember that you need to develop a messaging framework document outlining key messages, approved responses, and crisis communication strategy, because then you can ensure consistency in whatever you are saying to different people on different platforms. So, what are the final takeaways? So, finally, you need to have these three principles. Honesty. Honesty would mean communicating it truthfully, avoiding misinformation. Transparency would mean sharing information openly, even in crises. And accountability will mean owning actions, taking correcting actions, and telling what you're going to do. So these are the final takeaways on this part. So what do we do next? So having looked at how to define key messaging principles, we will now take a look at how to prepare the pre-approved crisis messaging templates that we talked about in this, so that your messages are honest, transparent, and accountable. So thank you so much for watching this first lecture on developing crisis communication plan. I hope you're continuing to learn new things, continuing to enjoy, and I do look forward to see you again. In the next lecture, please feel free to message me. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer your questions, and do download the PDF file to take a look at anything that you need to.